Religulous movie review. So this is another one of my scripted review series in which I go back and I look at a review I wrote years ago on the weblog and try and make a YouTube video out of it for whatever it may or may not be worth. I mention that specifically in this case because this is a movie that was a big deal 10 years ago. Lots of people were talking about it. And I haven't heard anything about this movie in years. I think people have just completely forgotten about it nowadays. I don't know. Maybe I'm hanging out with the wrong crowd. I mean, let me know in the comments if you think people are still talking about this movie. But I get the impression it's largely been forgotten. It interested people when it came out, though. There was a lot of buzz around this movie. This is a kind of a documentary, more of a polemic that was done by the comedian Bill Maher on religion. And Bill Maher is a critic of religion, hence the term religulous. Now, at the time this movie came out, I was very much interested in arguments that were deconstructing religion, having relatively recently moved from organized religion myself into a more agnostic position. So, I was getting into a lot of barroom conversations about religion and the universe and what does it all mean, and is there any proof for a God and stuff like that. So I was very much primed for this discussion that this movie would generate. And indeed, as I mentioned before, the year that this movie came out, a lot of people were referencing it. So it came up in a lot of these barroom conversations. People were like, you should really see this movie. It was getting a lot of good reviews. And I had high expectations going into it. I really like Bill Maher. And I know that Bill Maher is rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and he's a contrarian, so he gets liberals mad and he gets conservatives mad. He's a liberal himself, but he's got enough contrarian opinions that he rubs a lot of liberals the wrong way. So I'm hesitant to admit that I like him, but I like him. I find him funny. I find him witty. He's got plenty of opinions I don't agree with. Some of them in this movie, which I'll get to in a minute. But by and large, I do find him to be a very smart man, a very funny man, and all around entertaining. And the subject of religion or the subject of God and the nature of the universe is ripe for endless discussion or fascination. And I know Bill Maher is a comedian, but I think a lot of comedians have done some good work deconstructing organized religion or religious texts. Eddie Izzard or Ricky Gervais or David Cross. I think they've all done some funny bits, kind of mining the absurdities of what's in the Bible or organized religion. So I was expecting that this movie would be more like that. This would be Bill Maher essentially building a case against organized religion and, doing it with a bit of comedy thrown in, but essentially an intellectual argument made against organized religion that would be very thought-provoking, and, I would watch it with a cup of coffee and just kind of ponder whether his arguments were convincing or not. And I was so disappointed because that is not at all what I got from this movie. It is not a well-structured discussion. Instead, the structure of this movie, well, there is no structure. It's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So you've got a quick 5 minutes over here to laugh at some rednecks in a rural church. Another 2 minutes over here to laugh at a guy who believes Jonah actually literally survived inside the belly of a whale. Then 2 minutes over here to laugh at Scientology. A few quick jabs at the Mormons, over to the Orthodox Jews, the cannabis ministry in Amsterdam, etc. So there's two big problems with this. One is there's just no structure at all to this. So he's just going from one ridiculous religion to another, points out a few absurdities, laughs at it, and then goes to the next one. The second problem is he's just going after all the low-hanging fruit. I mean, He's just going after the fundamentalists, the people everybody knows are ridiculous. Now, I mean, I grew up in a conservative Calvinist background. But, you know, even we thought that the Mormons were ridiculous with what they believed in. Or, you know, even in my background, it was becoming extreme to believe in a literal 7-day creation. Most people had made some sort of accommodation that there probably was some sort of evolution in the creation of life. So, between the fact that he's got no structure at all to this, and the fact that he's just going after the low-hanging fruit, it doesn't really add a lot to the discussion. Now, admittedly, part of the problem is religion is such a huge subject. So I think either it might have given him more structure if he had gone after maybe mainstream Protestantism in the U.S. Now, that would have gotten the Protestants upset, of course. They would have been like, well, why are you picking on us? Christians are always persecuted, blah, 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 blah. You know, they love to complain about that kind of stuff. But it would have at least given the documentary some sort of a structure instead of just going all over with just every religious belief. The other thing is, again, just by... If you go after the ridiculous religious fundamentalists, you haven't really disproved religion. You've just proved that there are ridiculous extremes on the fringes of religion. But, you know, what about mainstream Protestantism? Now, when I reviewed Richard Dawkins' book, I also accused him of going after the low-hanging fruit. But there is maybe a little bit of a distinction to be made here. Richard Dawkins is a hardcore atheist. You know, he's absolutely certain there is no God. So if that's your position, then it's your job to not go after the religious fundamental freaks, but to go after the harder question of arguing that there's no God, so that even like a deist position or an agnostic position would be untenable from Richard Dawkins' point of view. So that's where he's got to go after. That's the difficult thing he needs to prove according to his argument. Bill Maher, on the other hand, is coming at this from more of an agnostic standpoint. So, in other words, Bill Maher doesn't have to prove that there is no God, because that's not his position. He's just going after organized religion. And yeah, fair enough, organized religion can be pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's one thing to say, maybe there's a God, because maybe there is a God. But it's quite another thing to say, yes, there is a God, and I know exactly what God wants, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do to make God happy. Now that's ridiculous. And I guess to be fair to Bill Maher, there really is not a lot of logic in that argument. So what else can you do really but laugh at it? And that's what he does. He doesn't attempt to have any rational explanation about why religion is not logical. He just laughs at it. Still, one can't help wishing the film had more to offer. As entertaining as it was to see Bill Maher travel the world to laugh at what people believed, it wasn't enough to justify a full-length film. I mean, maybe a 15-minute sketch, maybe, but not a whole film. And he didn't bring in anything new or noteworthy to the discussion. I mean, he's not the first comedian to attack religious dogma. He doesn't have any new groundbreaking material. Lots of times he will simply listen to what someone believes, and then he responds with, "Oh, come on, you don't really believe that, do you?" And then he laughs, and then we cut to the next scene. Now, admittedly, the simple laughing at religion does a lot to deflate it or to highlight the ridiculousness of it, but the audience has a right to expect more. Now, this film will no doubt tweak the noses of a lot of religious people. But if you're already agnostic or atheist, this film doesn't make you think about anything new that you haven't already thought of before. In terms of furthering the discourse, as they say, that there's no new arguments in here. One wishes that Bill Maher would have either narrowed his focus or squared off against someone capable of going toe-to-toe with him and forcing him to expand his arguments. Because if you watch his show, he's a smart guy. He's a good debater. But he needed somebody to challenge him to bring out his fullest potential. So when he goes to the redneck church and just laughs at what they believe, that's just too easy. It would have been nice if he was squaring off against a religious intellectual who would have forced him to up his game. And again, you do see this on his political debate show, where he is capable of getting into intelligent debates with people. And the frustrating thing is that there were religious intellectuals, smart people, in this movie, but he never really got into a detailed discussion with them. Or maybe he did and it got left on the cutting room floor, in which case there's some problems with editing going on. I don't know. The best thing... Sorry. As you can tell, I've got a lot of mixed feelings about this movie. I appreciate what Bill Maher was trying to do. I wish he had done a better job of doing it. The best thing I can say for this film is the speech at the end, when Bill Maher tried to tie all of the themes of the movie together. To get the full effect, you should probably watch it. And you don't need to watch the full movie if you don't want to. Just, go to YouTube, go to search Religulous end speech, or, Religulous speech at the end. And I'm sure you can find a copy of this somewhere on YouTube. You should really watch it because there's a lot of interesting visuals that Bill Maher used to illustrate his points. So like as he's talking about something, the visuals will pop up. And he does a very good job of delivering it. I'm going to give my attempt of reading his speech just because I think the more this gets disseminated, the better. I think this is a really good speech. But by all means, watch his instead, or watch his as well. Okay, anyways, here's me quoting his speech. Quote, plain fact is, religion must die for mankind to live. The hour is getting very late to be able to indulge having in key decisions made by religious people, by irrationalists, by those who would steer the ship of state not by a compass, but by the equivalent of reading the entrails of a chicken. George Bush prayed a lot about Iraq, but he didn't learn a lot about it. Faith means making a virtue out of not thinking. It's nothing to brag about. And those who preach faith and enable it and elevate it are intellectual slaveholders, keeping mankind in a bondage to fantasy and nonsense that has spawned and justified so much lunacy and destruction. Religion is dangerous because it allows human beings who don't have all the answers to think that they do. Most people would think it's wonderful when someone says, "I'm willing, Lord. I'll do whatever you want me to do." Except that since there are no gods actually talking to us, that void is filled in by people with their own corruptions and limitations and agendas. And anyone who tells you they just know what happens when you die, I promise you, they don't. How can I be so sure? Because I don't know, and you do not possess mental powers that I do not. The only appropriate attitude for man to have about the big question is not the arrogant certitude that is the hallmark of religion, but doubt. Doubt is humble, and that's what man needs to be, considering that human history is just a litany of getting shit dead wrong. That is why rational people, anti-religionists, must end their timidity and come out of the closet and assert themselves. And those who consider themselves only moderately religious really need to look in the mirror and realize that the solace and comfort that religion brings you comes at a horrible price. If you belonged to a political party or a social club that was tied to as much bigotry, misogyny, homophobia, violence, and sheer ignorance as religion is, you'd resign in protest. To do otherwise is to be an enabler, a mafia wife, for the true devils of extremism that draw their legitimacy from the billions of their fellow travelers. If the world does not come to an end here, or wherever, or if it limps into the future, decimated by the effects of religion-inspired nuclear terrorism, let's remember what the real problem was. We learned to precipitate mass death before we got past the neurological disorder of wishing for it. That's it. Grow up or die. Now, having quoted that full speech, let me say I don't actually agree with all of it. I agree with most of it. I'm going to add this note though. I think he needs to be more compassionate towards religious moderates. Because here's the thing. I mean, he says in the speech, if you belonged to a political party or a social club that was tied to as much bigotry, misogyny, homophobia, violence, blah, 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 as religion, you'd resign in protest. And indeed you would. But choosing a political party and choosing a religion are different. People don't choose their religion. They're born into it. That's why religions occupy geographical spheres of the world. People choose their politics. By and large, I know to a certain extent we're born into our politics as well, right? But most people, when they become of age, they decide what their values are and they choose a political party that aligns with those values. Religion, you just grow up with it surrounding you, and you're not really told you have a choice about this. You're told this is the way the world works. And some people make it out of that, and some people do not. And I don't agree with people like Marr and Christopher Hitchens and Penn Jillette and these other people who just pour contempt on anyone who is still religious, because basically what it comes down to is we are all flawed human beings stumbling about in the dark. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what's the point of this, why are we here, what's the nature of the universe. And people who are born into religious environments, some of them eventually end up putting all the pieces together and saying, okay, no, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to become an agnostic or an atheist. But not everybody gets there. And so some of them end up just taking the religion that they've been born into and making it more moderate. And I don't think that you can demonize those people or say, you know, you're responsible for enabling religion and stuff like that. You know, that this is religion they were born into. Sorry, I'm repeating myself, I know. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this point. Besides which, ultimately, I think what it comes down to, I don't believe in organized religion, but religion is largely a view of how people think the universe is structured. What's more important to me is how people think that society should be structured, because that's the thing we have the power to change here on earth. So somebody who is Catholic, you know, believes in heaven, believes in hell, I mean, if you're Catholic, you you do believe that the majority of the world's population is headed towards eternal damnation, which is a terrible thing to believe, but they didn't originate that. That's just a belief they were handed. Now, if you're Catholic and you're interested in social justice and interested in helping people, like a lot of Catholics are, the Catholic Workers' Party, the liberation theology, then those people, I think, are less dangerous than somebody who's an atheist, but is, somebody like Ayn Rand, for example. Ayn Rand was an atheist, had a very, in my opinion, a very detrimental view of how society could be structured. So I would much rather the world be populated by Catholic people who are sympathetic to liberation theology, or the Catholic Workers' Party, than atheists like Ayn Rand. So that's where I would disagree with Bill Maher. But I do largely agree with this speech about how religion can potentially be dangerous and how we just don't know. That line where he says, if anyone says that they know what happens to you after they die, I promise you they do not. Yeah, I'm in full agreement with that. Sorry, I'm rambling here. I'll just stop the review at this moment.